students, I am Shreya. I teach English Literature at Global Teachers Academy, right? We prepare students for the UGC NET exam. And this is the first set of questions from our English Literature very important question series, right? Now these questions, like I've already told, again cover important portions of the syllabus, which include British literature, world literature, literary criticism and theory, English language teaching, as well as your rhetorics, right? Today, in today's test, we are going to focus a little more on the lyrics of the poems, certain poems from the text itself, right? So portions from certain poems, portions from certain texts that are important for the exam point of view, right? Let's go on and see the questions. The first question here for you is, lightly, oh lightly, we bear her along, she sways like a flower in the wind of our song. She skims like a bird on the foam of a stream, she floats like a laugh from the lips of a dream, right? The question says these lines occur in the poem, right? Now I know for a lot of you, questions like these are difficult to tackle because it's very difficult for you to remember where each line is from, right? So I always suggest my students to look at some important works of some important authors, go through the poem, and instead of trying to learn the poem, try and understand what the poem means. So for instance, this one is from Palanquin Barriers, right? It's a poem by Sarojini Naidu, who's also called the Nightingale of India, right? So it's a very popular poem by her. So whenever I teach this poem in the class, I tell the students what the poem means, right? It's about, so palanquin, if I give you a closest Hindi synonym, would mean like a dolly, right? So it's about people who are carrying a person who's sitting inside the palanquin, right? So if you know the idea behind the poem, it's always easier for you to understand the lines that come from the poem, okay? Again, about Sarojini Naidu, she's written a very important collection of poems which is known as the Golden Threshold, right? Which could be asked in the examination also. Another important poem of Sarojini Naidu that you must look at in terms of details, lines, summaries is In the Bazaars of Hyderabad, right? In the Bazaars of Hyderabad. Moving on then to the next question. From a second space perspective, city space becomes more of a mental and ideational field, conceptualized in imagery, reflective thought, and symbolic representation. A conceived space of the imagination, or what I will henceforth describe as the urban imagery. Which of the following statements cannot be applied to Soja's proposition on the second space, right? So Edward Soja has given a space theory where he has categorized three spaces. So there is the first space, there is the second space, and there is the third space, right? The space theory, the third space theory in particular, is known as a social linguistic post-colonial theory, right? I'll explain all these three spaces to you. So what is the first space? The first space is a space where the individuals are just trying to understand and analyze the space, right? Now what is the second space then? The second space is the space where there are also feelings involved when you're trying to analyze and understand the space. So it's not just the space being present that you're trying to understand, it's also the feelings that come. And that would help you in understanding the space differently, right? So these are the two spaces that he's talked of. And the third space that he deals with is a space of coming together of two spaces. And a sort of celebration that exists when you're a part of this space, right? So the third space is also a theory that's given. The third space theory is also further propounded by your 𝐒𝐴𝐿𝐵𝐢, and he calls it the third space of enunciation, right? But coming to the first and second space that Edward Soja talks of. So the first space, like I told you, is the space where you're just trying to understand and analyze a space, and the second space is the space where you're actually trying to, where you've involved your feelings also in the understanding of what the space means, right? The text in which all these things are written is called the third space, And the subtitle of the text is Journey to Los Angeles and Other Real and Imaginary Places, right? You should remember the name of this text. So the options. Second space perspective tends to be more subjective, right? And the question says, which of the following cannot be applied? Like I said in one of the previous lectures also, cannot is very important when you sit for the NET exam. Not. Which of these is not one of the statements? Which of these is not said by Derrida about deconstruction, right? So not is important, cannot is important. So we have to find out the odd one out here. The second space perspective tends to be more subjective, right? It tends to be more subjective because there are feelings involved. If there are feelings involved, I might, so if we are just the first space, for instance, if it's a movie theater and two people are watching the same movie, in the second space, when you're trying to analyze this movie space along with your feelings, it changes, right? The second space changes because everybody has individual feelings, everybody has individual context in which those feelings apply. Okay, so it's obviously subjective. It's concerned with the symbolic representation of reality because the reality is perceived through your own feelings, right? Fourth option, the second space perspective deals with thoughts about space. It does deal with your thoughts about space, your feelings about the space, right? So the only odd one out, the second space perspective is concerned with fundamentally materialistic approach, which is not true. It doesn't make sense also. So the wrong option here is C, right? Had you not known what the second space theory means, right? Then also generally looking at the questions, generally looking at all the options available, you could have easily marked C out. Okay. Next question. Which of the following statements is not true, again not true, very important, of Kazuo Ishigaro's Remains of the Day, the novel? Your options here are A. Uses Butler as a pivotal character. B. Uses the classic English detective story form. C. Refers to England in the 1930s. D. Became a very successful film, right? So these are your four options. Kazuo Ishiguro, again, 2017 Nobel Prize in Literature winner. Becomes very important from net perspective. Remains of the Day is believed to be his magnum opus, right? Very important text again. So the summary of the text in detail. Yes, the butler is the pivotal character. Yes, it is set in 1930s. The text came out in 1989, right? This is also important. And you must look at some of his other texts also. Ishiguro's other texts like Never Let Me God, A Pale View of the Hills, An Artist of the Floating World, right? Some of these texts also in details, right? Again, this book also won the Man Booker Prize. How else can you know that a text is important, right? It's won the Man Booker Prize. The author of the book has just won the Nobel Prize in Literature, right? The text that you're talking about is believed to be his magnus opus, right? So everything is believed to be his magnum opus, right? So everything about the text is extremely important, okay? And the center of the character is a butler. And then it's not everything about this is true. It did go on to become a very successful film. It is set in the 1930s, but it does not use the classic English detective story form. Okay. Next question. It again starts with a quote. A ton of man in thy large bulk is rid, but sure thou art but a 𝐤𝐴𝐿derkin of wit. Right? So in the above lines, what does Dryden mean by 𝐤𝐴𝐿derkin? Right? Now it's a difficult question, I understand, but the 𝐤𝐴𝐿derkin here means a small barrel of wine. Where is this from? This is from Dryden's very important text called Macfleck. Okay? Macfleck, no, again, he is critiquing who? Thomas Shadwell, who was the poet laureate of England. Who's the current poet laureate can be a question. The current poet laureate is Carol Ann Duffy. Okay, was appointed as the poet laureate in 2009. So Macfleckno, again coming back to Macfleckno, what is the nature, what is the genre in which it's written? It's it's a mock epic, right? Now what is mock epic? Very famous feature of the Augustans. What does the mock epic do? The mock epic tends to take a trivial issue and write about it in a lofty manner, right? So it takes up a trivial issue. For example, your Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock takes up the trivial issue of somebody taking off the lock from somebody's hair and takes it to a level in terms of its description where it almost seems like an epic, right? So 𝐸𝐴, again, Thomas Shadwell was critiquing Thomas Shadwell, who was the poet laureate then, right? And he says that 𝐸𝐴 is an individual who is the poet king of nonsense, and then he's going to give up his throne for his son, who's as nonsensical as he is, and the son is Thomas Shadwell. Okay? Moving on then. The fifth question says, the assertion is one of Flaubert's main motivations in writing the novel Madame Bovary was his antipathy for the bourgeoisie. Reason is, Flaubert strongly believed that bourgeoisie are those who think, feel and act in terms of utilitarianism and who reject the humanity and uniqueness of the individual person. Right? Again, your options, as the options are in case of assertion reason questions, both A and R are true and R is the correct explanation of A. B, both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A. C, A is true but R is false. D, A is false but R is true. Right? These are your four options. Now who is Flaubert? Flaubert is Gustave Flaubert, who was a French writer, right? Madame Bovary is his first novel. The novel was written in 1856. Right? Now what is this about? It's about this female called Emma. There are a lot of subplots also that go on, but centrally about this female called Emma Bovary, right? Who's having a lot of affairs, who's having a lot of adulterous affairs, and who lives beyond her means in order to escape the general emptiness of life. Okay? So, and then there is also in the text a general hatred for the middle class values, right? The term bourgeoisie. Who are the bourgeoisie? So bourgeoisie are the middle class, people who do not have landed aristocracy, people who do not have landed wealth and landed property. But what do these people have? These people are professionals. So by virtue of being professionals, they do not have to undergo physical labor or do not have to perform physical labor for their living, right? But Flaubert is very critical of these kind of people because he feels that they are always extremely utilitarian, right? They only think about people's profit, right? And in that process, they reject the profit of a large number of people, right? What is utilitarian? J.S. Mill's utilitarianism, what is it about? It's about doing good of the largest number of people, right? When you're trying to do that, what do you tend to ignore? The uniqueness of the individual person, right? A problem that black feminists also have with feminism in general, that they tend to, in taking women as a comprehensive unit, they tend to ignore the individual anxieties of, say, black women or queer women, right? So, A is true and B, and the reason is also true, right? So, your answer here becomes both A and R are true and R is the correct explanation of. Next question. For nature then the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all, right? In these lines from Tintern Abbey Revisited, Wordsworth is talking about, right? Tintern Abbey, poem by William Wordsworth, right? Part of his lyrical ballads, okay? Now, this poem itself has a very long title and I'm going to slowly read out the title for you because it's an important question that could feature in the exam. So, the title is Lines written a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour July 13, 1798. Right? This is the complete title. Now, the option says A, the second stage in his relationship with nature. B, the first stage in his relationship with nature. C, both first and second stages. Third stage, right? So what are the two stages of his relationship with nature? The first stage of his relationship with nature is his interaction with nature as a boy, right? So it does talk about his boyish days when he was interacting with nature, okay? And the second stage is now when he's come back and he's reflecting upon nature, Okay, so the answer here would be not A, the answer here would be C, because he says that it was all gone by, right? So he's thinking about that time. He's not just talking about his first stage of interaction, but he's also reflecting upon it as an adult. Okay, moving on. Which of these authors is not a writer of African American slave narratives? Okay, so a lot of writers have written important slave narratives. Here the one that would be odd, the one that would not be the slave narrative, I'm going to tell you, but you must also know the slave narratives of the other three. Okay, so Solomon Northup has written a slave narrative. He is an African American slave narrative writer. A very important text also in Delhi University's MA syllabus. It's called the 12 Years a Slave. Okay. Then again, Frederick Douglass, again a text in either MA or BA of Delhi University. What is the name of the text? The name of the text is called Narrative of the Life of, his name only, Frederick Douglass, right? Then there is Sojourner's Truth. There is also a narrative with the same. There is also a narrative, an African American slave narrative that is written. It's called the Narrative of Sojourner's Truth, a bondswoman of the olden times. Okay, so this one also you must know. Then there is only one person left. It's Phyllis Wheatley, and she's a female, and she's written quite a lot of poems about slavery, and she's critiqued slavery, but she's not written an entire slave narrative. So the answer here is Phyllis Wheatley. Okay. Which of the following statements best describes the term deconstruction? Okay. So the question is from theory. The theory that they are asking you to think about is deconstruction. First, it seeks to expose the problematic nature of centered discourses. B, it advocates subjective or pre-interpretation. C, it emphasizes the importance of historical context. D, it is a method of critical analysis. Here again, the thing to note is which of the following statements best describes the term deconstruction. It is obviously a method of critical analysis, but it is not a best description of deconstruction. Had it been structuralism here, the answer still could have been it is a method of critical analysis. So that is not what we are looking for here. What we are looking for is what is the best description of deconstruction, right? A little bit about deconstruction, introduced by a theory introduced by the works of Jacques Derrida, right, who was a French Jew and himself had a lot of problem with this idea of things that are placed at the center and those at the periphery, right? A little bit about the center-periphery equation. What does the center-periphery equation means? He's also given us a term called the transcendental signifier. A transcendental signifier is the central signifier, right? A central signifier through which all other signifiers derive their meaning. So if I tell you in the Renaissance, man was at the center, right? So everything else in the society was deriving its meaning from man, right? So that is the idea of a centered discourse, that everything around the center derives its meaning from the center. And this is a problem that deconstruction has, because the deconstruction critics say that the center holds only because the periphery allows it to hold its position at the center. Because the center has to constantly maintain the idea of difference, which is only apparent, right? So your answer here is going to be A. Given below are two statements. One is labeled as assertion, the other is labeled as reason, right? So your assertion is the literature of Jacobean era is dominated by works revealing symptoms of melodrama and sensationalism. The reason is Jacobean age is generally ruled by a spirit of decadence. In the context of the two statements, which of the following is correct, right? So Jacobean era is what era? It's the era of the Stuarts, but in that it's the era of rule of James I, which was between 1603 to 1625. Right? So who are the people who are the dramatists who are writing in this era? These include Ben Jonson, Thomas Middleton, Thomas Dekker, Thomas Heywood, right? And the general theme was melodrama and sensationalism. But there was also a general spirit of decadence, right? But the reason why there was a spirit of melodrama and sensationalism is not because there was a spirit of decadence. So both these statements, while are true, the assertion is not explained by the reason, right? So your answer here would be B. Next question, match the following lists. List 1 are certain phrases from poems, right? And so I'm going to read those out. First one is sound of stick upon the floor. Second one, heads bobbin bound in mummy cloth. Third, with beauty like a tightened bow. Fourth, a tattered coat upon a stick, right? Now in list 2 is titles of the poems. The first poem is Byzantium. The second is Sailing to Byzantium. Third is Cool and Bellili, 1931. And fourth is the No Second. Right? So now all these questions, or all these poems and all these phrases, if you can figure out by now, and you must be able to figure out by now, are by a certain individual called William Butler Yeats, right? Now William Butler Yeats used a lot of religious symbolism, a lot of mythology in his poems, right? You must do this poet in detail. He's an important poet, and a question very similar to this kind has featured in one of your NET examinations, where they did ask you lines from Byzantium, Sailing to Byzantium, and No Second Troy, right? So all these three are important poems, and even if you know, say for instance, 2 of the options, you would be able to sort of understand, right? So the first one, Byzantium, is heads bobbin bound in mummy cloth, right? So 1 is 2, right? This one, Sailing to Byzantium, the second one is a tattered coat upon a stick. This is a very, very important line from the poem Sailing to Byzantium. It's already featured in some of your exams, okay? So 4 is 2. Now there are again 2 options here. So No Second Troy, again a very important poem, and No Second Troy is with beauty like a tightened bow. Again, very important line, very, very important line from these poems. So a tattered coat upon a stick from Sailing to Byzantium, and with beauty like a tightened bow from No Second Troy are extremely important lines, and that makes D your answer. Moving on then. Kafka's trial has all the following characteristics except, right? It's vivid yet surreal, it's dystopian, the use of historical details of setting, the depiction of totalitarian society, right? So these are the 4 options. Which of these is the characteristic of Franz Kafka's trial, right? Which of these is a character? So this vivid yet surreal has become a characteristic of Kafka, right? And it's become a very important characteristic of almost all his texts. And it's become like a characteristic, like I was telling you. And there is also a term that's associated with this characteristic. It's called Kafkaesque. So the kind of premise that Kafka creates in his text, it's almost become like a setting that, so your Byronic hero. Similar to that, there is almost a space that Kafka creates in all of his texts, which is known as Kafkaesque. So what is this space? This space is a space of unpredictability, of something bizarre that is happening, of something illogical that you can't explain. So in his text, which is known as Metamorphosis also, this is a similar feature that appears where the main character becomes a fly, right? Similarly in trial, somebody is being held on a trial without you being given the reason, or without that person being given a reason why is this person held on a trial. So clearly, when you're not told your problem, when you're not told the crime for which you're punished, it's obviously a totalitarian society, right? You're ruled according to whims and fancies of the people. It's vivid yet surreal. It's true, because it's a general characteristic of all Kafka's text, and it is dystopian, okay? So it does not, while it does talk about the kind of regimes that existed in the world, the setting itself did not use too many historical details, okay? Moving on to the next question. She dwells with beauty that must die. Very important line in one of Keats's ode, right? Very important line. And what is this poem? The poem is the Ode on Melancholy. So it's a line from the Ode on Melancholy. There's not too much to talk of here. It's a very important line. Similar to the line "Truth is beauty and beauty is truth," which appears in Ode to the Grecian urn, right? Similarly, she dwells with beauty, beauty that must die. Okay, very important line, very well quoted line that Keats has written. So not too much to talk of here. It's a line in Ode to Melancholy. Next question is a question from Canadian literature. Which of the following observations are true about Beatrice Cullenton's April Rain Tree? First, it is a fictional account of their lives of two Métis sisters growing up in Winnipeg. 2. April has a darker complexion and identifies herself with Métis population. Third, the two sisters have been removed from their parents' home and placed with a series of foster families. 4. Cheryl has a light complexion and identifies herself with white population. Right? So Beatrice Cullenton is is a Canadian, and she belongs to the native. She's a member of the ethnic group which is native to Canada, which is the Métis group. Right? It's an ethical group of people who are native to Canada. So Canada's ethnic population, right? So again, if you know just this much, she's a Canadian author with Métis origins, you would know that it's a fictional account of two sisters who are growing up in Winnipeg, right? The second option, so I won't say you must go through the summary in detail, but you should have a basic idea. So it's also about sisters who've been removed from their parents' home and have been placed with a series of foster families, right? So both the sisters are separated. It's about these two sisters who are separated from their parents and are placed in two different families, right? And it's their journey in life from there on. Moving on. Given below are two statements. One is labelled as assertion and the other is labelled as reason. The assertion is, in the absurd plays of Pinter and Beckett, lack of communication seems to be a predominant theme. Reason. Existential philosophy had a tremendous influence on dramatists of the period. Nihilism and meaningless of life taking a front seat. In the context of the above statements, which of the following is correct? In the context of the above statements, which of the following is correct? A. Both A and R are true. So both A and R are true and R is the correct explanation of A. B. Both A and R are true but R is not the correct explanation of A. C. A is true but R is false. D. A is false but R is true. Right? Who's Pinter? Pinter is Harold Pinter. Beckett is Samuel Beckett. So this one's Harold Pinter. This one's Samuel Beckett. Right? There are texts that both of them have written. Okay, important text that Harold Pinter has written. You must look at a brief summary of those: The Homecoming, The Birthday Party, and The Caretaker. Okay, Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot, very important. In Detail, and Endgame is also an important text. Okay, so both these texts, all these texts by both these authors. So these were the absurd plays, right? The world was absurd. And lack of communication does seem to be a predominant theme. If I go back to Waiting for Godot, which is a text that most of us have read in detail in our respective syllabuses, you would know that there are portions which is extremely incomprehensible in between, right? Extremely incomprehensible as words are put together, but there is no meaning of those things. Okay, so lack of communication seems to be a predominant theme. And what is the idea behind this lack of communication? The idea is that for each person, then this lack of communication would mean something, right? So lack of communication is also a kind of communication, and this kind of communication would mean different things to different people. Okay, so the reason that is stated, which is existential philosophy, which was a philosophy which can be attributed to Albert Camus, who had given the myth of Sisyphus. Right? The myth of Sisyphus. So what does existential philosophers are saying? Existential philosophers say that so your existence is not determined by a greater macro narrative, right? Everybody creates their micro narratives, And for each of those persons, those micro narratives become the narrative of your existence, right? Which means your existence precedes your essence, right? You're born first, and then you decide what your essence should be or what your essence must be. It is not a fixed essence that is attributed to a male, a female, a doctor, or a teacher. It is the essence that you decide to pick up as you start leading your life. Okay? So existential philosophy believes in that. What is nihilism? So while existential philosophy, existentialism believes that everybody has to create their own narrative, and their own narrative becomes the central narrative of their life, and they must lead their life according to that central narrative. Nihilism feels that because there is no central narrative or there is no one narrative, then what is the need for having that narrative at all? Okay? So general meaninglessness was the reason why they started writing absurd plays, and lack of communication is a predominant theme, right? So the answer here would be both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation. Okay? Moving on, which of the following plays does not use the device of play within a play? Right? Hamlet does use it. Hamlet is a play by Shakespeare. So is Midsummer's Night Dream, where there is also a play within a play. The Spanish tragedy, written by Thomas Kyd, also uses a play within a play, right? So only Women Beware Women, which is a text which is written by Thomas Middleton, does not use the device of play within a play, right? So your answer here is this. Again, Hamlet in detail, Midsummer's Night Dream in detail, Spanish tragedy in detail, and a brief summary about Women Beware Women. Okay? Moving on. The purpose of the pre-Raphaelites was primarily to promote A. Complexity and ambivalence in art and literature, B. Simplicity and naturalness in art and literature, C. Symbolic and classical modes in art and literature, D. Psychological and mythical modes in art and literature. Right? So pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, a little bit about that, was founded in 1849 by William Holman Hunt, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Then there was John There's some problem with my pen. There's John E. Malas, and a few important other people, right? So what was the reason why they started it? It was a movement that was started against the unimaginative works of art, right? So they wanted to return to the naturalness of art, right? They said that even humble objects can be represented photographically in art. Okay? They were also trying to test all other available conventions in art, and they were also trying to defy them in certain degree, right? So they wanted to go back to the simplicity and naturalness of art and literature, right? So this also becomes like a definition for you about pre-Raphaelites. Okay?